As Daryan opens his door to the dead of night, a tiny bundle lies on his doorstep. Wrapped in tattered cloth, the baby's innocent eyes stare up at him. No note, no explanation, just the strange feeling that this is no coincidence. In the stillness of his peaceful life, Daryan feels something shift. A knock at the Dora baby on his doorstep, and a symbol unlike anything he's ever seen. Little does he know, this child holds the key to an ancient secret that will change everything. A mysterious bloodline, hidden for centuries, is awakening. Daryan thought he had found peace in the solitude of the forest, but now, the child he's protecting has become the target of powerful forces. As shadows close in, Daryan knows he can no longer remain in the safety of his quiet life. With every step, the weight of the child's power grows stronger. Daryan's world has turned upside down, and he realizes that the fate of the world rests on the tiny shoulders of the baby he found on his doorstep. But can he protect it before it's too late? Daryan has no choice but to protect the baby, no matter the cost. As men in dark suits arrive at his door, the ancient bloodline begins to awaken. The truth is more terrifying than Daryan ever imagined, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But as the men retreated into the shadows, Daryan understood one thing. He had no choice but to protect the child, no matter the cost. The night was dark, and a strange knocking echoed through the silent house. It was the middle of the night, and the man had long abandoned the idea of visitors. Who would dare knock at such an hour? But when he opened the door, what lay before him was beyond anything he could have imagined. The night was calm, a soft breeze stirring the leaves of the tall trees that surrounded the small cottage nestled in the hills. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and the only sound was the occasional chirp of crickets. It was a peaceful setting, far removed from the chaos of the world. No one came to this secluded part of the land unless they had a reason. For Daryan, this solitude was a blessing. He had spent years seeking peace away from the noise and struggles of city life. And here, in the quiet of nature, he had found it. Daryan had always been a man of few words, content with the company of his own thoughts. His days were simply tending to his garden, reading by the fire, and occasionally walking through the dense forest that bordered his home. It was a life that brought him peace, but also a certain loneliness, one he had long come to accept. That night, as the moonlight bathed the cottage in a pale glow, Daryan sat by the fire, lost in thought. The crackling of the logs was the only sound, until, suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the stillness. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. Visitors at this hour were rare, and he hadn't expected anyone. The knock was soft but urgent, like someone in distress. Daryan stood slowly, his mind racing. Who could it be? And why now of all times? When he opened the door, what he saw would forever alter the course of his life. On the doorstep, wrapped in a tattered cloth, lay a bundle. He bent down, his hands trembling, and as he carefully unfolded the cloth, a baby's face stared up at him, innocent and unaware of the world it had entered. There was no note, no explanation, just the baby, lying there as if waiting for him. Daryan stood frozen, the baby's tiny, delicate form in his arms. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who would leave a child at his doorstep? And why now, in the dead of night? His first instinct was to call for help, to rush to the village and ask the elders if they knew anything about this mysterious child. But something in the pit of his stomach told him this was no coincidence. The baby's arrival was part of a much larger puzzle, one that he wasn't sure he was ready to solve. As Daryan stared down at the child, he noticed something strange. The baby's wrist was adorned with a small golden bracelet, its surface engraved with symbols he couldn't understand. He traced his fingers over the markings, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. Where had this baby come from? Who would leave such a sign? And why the strange bracelet? His heart pounded, and his mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. He wanted to believe that someone would come for the child soon, that this was some kind of mix-up. But there was a nagging feeling inside him, a feeling that the child's presence here was more than a random accident. The baby looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, oblivious to the questions swirling around Daryan's mind. As the minutes passed, his uncertainty grew. The village was miles away, and it would take hours to get there and back. The night was too dark, too quiet. It would be foolish to go out now, especially with such an infant in his arms. He could wait until morning, but then again, he didn't know if waiting would be enough. Something about the situation felt urgent, like time was running out. Daryan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had no idea what he was about to uncover. But he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the world. The next morning, Daryan set out to investigate, his every step heavy with the weight of the unknown. He could no longer ignore the strange symbols on the child's bracelet, nor the fact that no one had come forward to claim the baby. As he carried the child in his arms, he couldn't help but feel that something far more dangerous was unfolding around him. His peaceful life was slipping away, replaced by a looming uncertainty he couldn't shake. The village was bustling with activity as Daryan walked through the narrow streets, but his mind was elsewhere. He approached the town's healer, an elderly woman known for her knowledge of ancient symbols and forgotten lore. She was his last hope for understanding the mysterious bracelet. Upon seeing it, the healer's eyes widened in shock. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice low and trembling. Daryan explained the events of the previous night, his voice shaking slightly as he relayed the bizarre circumstances. The healer nodded slowly, as if processing something far larger than the moment allowed. "This child," she began, her voice full of trepidation, "is no ordinary baby. This bracelet is from the old bloodlines. It marks the child as part of a lineage that has been hidden for centuries. It's a curse, not a blessing." The words hit Daryan like a blow to the chest. A curse? What did that mean? He had always heard whispers of ancient secrets, of families who had once ruled over lands now lost to time, but he had never given them much thought. Now, standing before the healer with the child still in his arms, the weight of those ancient stories seemed to press down on him, suffocating him with their gravity. The healer's eyes narrowed as she stared at the child. "You must protect this baby," she said urgently. "If the wrong people find out about him, it could mean disaster for all of us. The bloodline he carries has been haunted for generations, and they will stop at nothing to reclaim him." Daryan's mind spun. Protect the child? From who? And what was this bloodline that the healer spoke of? His gut twisted as he realized that his life's quiet, peaceful existence was never going to be the same again. Days passed, and Daryan's world became a whirlwind of questions and fear. As he tried to protect the baby, strange occurrences began to unfold around him. He could hear whispers in the wind, voices that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The villagers began to avoid him, casting furtive glances as if they knew something he didn't. There was a growing sense of danger, a feeling that someone or something was watching his every move. One evening, as Daryan sat by the fire with the baby in his arms, there was a knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat. He had grown accustomed to the late-night visitors, but this time felt different. This time, he knew the danger had finally found him. When he opened the door, standing before him were two men in dark suits, their faces cold and emotionless. They didn't introduce themselves, but the air around them crackled with authority. One of the men stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Daryan with unsettling intensity. "We're here for the child," the man said, his voice flat and without a hint of hesitation. Daryan's blood ran cold. He knew without a doubt that these men were not ordinary strangers. They were part of something far larger, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The men tried to step inside, but Daryan stood his ground, blocking their path. "I won't let you take him," he said, his voice thin but resolute. He didn't know who these men were or why they were after the child. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let them have him. The man in the front raised an eyebrow, almost as if amused. "You don't understand, do you?" he said softly. "This child is not just a baby. He is the key to everything, the key to a power that has been hidden for centuries." Daryan's mind reeled as the truth began to unravel before him. The child was not just any innocent infant. He was part of a secret bloodline, a lineage that held the key to unimaginable power. The bracelet was not a curse seat, was a symbol of that power, marking the child as the one who could unlock it. And there were those who would stop at nothing to possess him. Before Daryan could react, the men moved swiftly, grabbing the baby from his arms. But just as they did, something extraordinary happened. The baby's eyes glowed with a soft, otherworldly light, and the men froze in their tracks, their faces contorting in fear. "It's true," the man whispered, his voice shaking. "The bloodline is awakening." In that moment, Daryan realized the truth. This was no ordinary child, and his life would never be the same again. The fate of the world seemed to rest on the tiny shoulders of the baby he had found on his doorstep. But as the men retreated into the shadows, Daryan understood one thing. He had no choice but to protect the child, no matter the cost. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Daryan moved through his life like a man walking through a storm, each step unsure, every glance over his shoulder filled with dread. He kept the child hidden in the deepest parts of his home, away from prying eyes, always on alert, never allowing himself to rest. He knew that the men would return, and when they did, they would bring others. The bloodline the baby carried was too important to leave in the hands of one man, no matter how strong his resolve. Daryan had become the protector of something far greater than himself, force that could reshape the very fabric of the world. As the days turned into weeks, Daryan found himself in constant motion, always looking over his shoulder, always one step ahead of those who sought the child. But even as the danger grew, he realized something could never go back to the life he once knew. The quiet cottage, the peaceful solitude, it was all gone. He had been thrust into a battle that would not end until the truth about the child was revealed. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, Daryan walked through the forest, the baby cradled gently in his arms. The world was silent. The only sounds the soft rustling of leaves beneath his feet. He could feel the weight of the child's power, a power that seemed to hum in the air around him, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. Sometimes destiny comes knocking when you least expect it, Daryan thought, his eyes scanning the dark woods. And when it does, you have no choice but to answer. He glanced down at the child, who now looked up at him with calm, knowing eyes. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. But Daryan understood now. This was the path he was meant to walk on, filled with mystery, struggle, and above all, the unwavering need to protect what was most sacred. As he disappeared into the shadows of the forest, the baby's light flickered softly in his arms, a promise of a future that had yet to unfold.